You have 4 minutes to realize you have made a mistake. Alicia Grant said it so quietly that the sound barely rose above the soft hum of the bank's air conditioning, but every person inside the marble lobby heard it. The handcuffs had already clicked around her wrists. Not tightly enough to leave injury, but cold enough to remind everyone watching that the woman in the faded navy coat was no longer being treated like a customer. She stood beside the polished counter of Whitmore Federal Bank, her palms turned inward, her shoulders straight, her chin lifted just enough to keep her dignity from touching the floor. Around her, the Tuesday morning crowd had gone still. A businessman near the velvet rope stopped scrolling through his phone. An elderly woman clutched her deposit envelope to her chest. Somewhere behind the teller windows, a printer continued spitting paper into the silence, each thin sheet sliding out with a whisper that sounded too loud. Officer Mark Reynolds stood at Alicia's side with one hand resting near his belt, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on her as if calmness itself were suspicious. 4 minutes, he repeated, letting a dry laugh pass through his nose. Ma'am, this is not a movie. You walked into a bank asking to move $240,000, and now you're telling me how much time I have. Alicia looked at the clock above the manager's office. 11:56 a.m. The second hand jerked forward, indifferent and sharp. I'm telling you how much time you have before the truth reaches this room, she said. The words did not shake. That seemed to bother him more than anger would have. Behind him, Claire Whitmore, the branch manager, stood with a tablet pressed against her ribs like a shield. Her blonde hair was pinned so tightly it pulled at the corners of her face, and her suit looked expensive enough to make apology feel unnecessary. She had been polite when Alicia first entered. Polite in the careful way people are when they are measuring someone from across a room. But the moment Alicia gave the transfer amount, the warmth left Claire's voice. When Alicia showed the authorization card, Claire did not verify it. She looked at Alicia's coat, her simple flats, the old leather folder under her arm, and decided the story before asking for the facts. Officer, Claire said, keeping her voice low but not low enough, we have protocols for suspected identity fraud. Alicia turned her eyes toward her. Then follow them. A small movement passed through the row of tellers. Emily Brooks, the youngest one, swallowed hard. She had seen the card. She had seen the account code light green on her screen for 2 brief seconds before Claire stepped in and told her to lock the terminal. Emily's fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly, as if the truth were right there beneath them and all she had to do was press one key. Officer Reynolds leaned closer to Alicia, not shouting, but speaking with the confidence of a man used to being obeyed. Tell us whose money it really is. The sentence landed harder than any raised voice could have. A few customers glanced away, embarrassed by the cruelty of hearing it and relieved it was not aimed at them. Alicia inhaled slowly. The lobby smelled of floor polish, cold coffee, and rainwater drying on wool coats. Outside, American flags hung from silver poles along the sidewalk, snapping faintly in the wind. Inside, beneath cameras and chandeliers, a black woman stood in cuffs for asking a bank to do what it was legally required to do. Her father had taught her never to bow her head in rooms built to make her feel small. He had taught her that silence could be discipline, not surrender. So Alicia did not explain who she was. Not yet. She did not say that the man whose name sat at the bottom of the authorization file had worn 4 stars on his shoulders. She did not say the money was not for her, not for luxury, not for escape, but for a veteran lying in a hospital 8 miles away with a surgical team waiting and time running thin. She only looked at Emily, then at the small blue card lying on the counter beside the old leather folder. Call the number, Alicia said. Claire's lips tightened. Reynolds scoffed. We're past phone calls. But Emily's eyes moved to the card again, and something in her face changed. Fear was still there, but beneath it something steadier began to rise. The clock clicked to 11:57. Alicia felt the metal at her wrists grow colder. Officer Reynolds shifted his weight, already confident the room belonged to him. He had no idea that 4 minutes in Washington, D.C. could move faster than pride. 18 minutes earlier, Alicia Grant had entered Whitmore Federal Bank without drawing attention from anyone who mattered. The rain had just stopped outside, leaving the sidewalks dark and glossy, and the soles of her simple black flats made almost no sound against the marble floor. She carried an old leather folder under one arm, the kind with softened corners and a brass clasp that no longer closed perfectly. Inside was a hospital invoice, a transfer authorization, and a faded photograph of two young soldiers standing beside a dusty transport truck somewhere in the Middle East. One of them was her father, Marcus Grant, long before the stars, before the televised briefings, before people in uniform stood when he entered a room. The other was Harold Bennett, the man waiting for surgery at St. Agnes Medical Center, 8 miles across town. Harold had saved her father once, not in a way the world had celebrated with cameras, but in the quiet way men remembered when they stopped talking at dinner and stared too long at the wall. When Alicia was a child, Harold used to visit every 4th of July with a limp, a laugh that shook the porch, and a pocket full of butterscotch candies he pretended were classified supplies. He never had much money. He never asked for anything. So when the call came that morning, when his niece said the hospital needed payment confirmation before noon or the procedure would be delayed, Alicia did not hesitate. Her father was already in transit from Virginia, unreachable in the air for a short stretch, but the Emergency Family Fund had clear instructions. Help the people who carried you when you could not carry yourself. That was written in her father's handwriting on the first page of the folder. Alicia had dressed quickly, not for status, not for impression, but for weather and urgency. A navy coat, a cream sweater, her hair pulled back neatly, no jewelry except a thin silver watch her mother had given her before she passed. She knew banks like this. She knew the quiet temperature drop that happened when someone decided your clothes did not match your account. Still, she believed procedure would protect her. Numbers did not have skin. Signatures did not have accents. Authorization codes did not care whether a person arrived in a luxury sedan or a 10-year-old pickup. At least, that was what she told herself as she stepped into line beneath the high ceiling, where the light from tall windows spread across the floor in pale rectangles. Emily Brooks called her forward with a nervous but kind smile. Alicia placed the folder on the counter and slid the transfer form through the opening. "I need this processed as an emergency medical payment," she said. "The amount is $240,000. Emily's smile flickered, but she stayed professional. She checked the form, entered the account number, and then paused when the screen asked for a secondary authorization. Alicia gave her the blue card. Department of Defense Emergency Liaison. Emily read it twice. Her posture changed, not with suspicion but with surprise. "One moment, ma'am," she said softly. Her fingers moved across the keyboard. For one brief second, Alicia saw the screen reflect in Emily's glasses. Green approval. Valid account. Authorized signer. Then Claire Whitmore appeared behind the teller station as if the number itself had summoned her. "Is there a problem?" Claire asked, looking first at the screen, then at Alicia, then at Alicia's coat. "No problem," Alicia said. "Just urgency." Claire picked up the blue card with 2 fingers. "And where did you get this?" The question was polite enough to deny insult, sharp enough to carry it. Alicia felt the old familiar stillness settle over her chest. "It was issued to me." Claire's eyes moved to the folder. "By whom?" Alicia looked at the clock. 11:42 a.m. 48 minutes until Harold's scheduled preparation window closed. "By the office listed on the card," she said. "You can call and verify." Claire smiled without warmth. "I think we should take a careful look before moving this kind of money." Alicia nodded once. "Careful is fine. Slow is not." That was the moment the air shifted. Not loudly, not visibly, but Alicia felt it, the way a room can decide a person is out of place before anyone says the words. Claire leaned toward Emily and murmured something Alicia could not hear. Emily's face went pale. Then the terminal locked. Then Claire stepped away with Alicia's card in her hand, and through the glass doors, Alicia saw a patrol car pull to the curb. Claire Whitmore did not walk back to Alicia with answers. She walked back with distance. It showed in the way she kept the blue card flat against her tablet, as if touching it too closely might make her responsible for what it proved. Behind the glass doors, Officer Mark Reynolds stepped out of his patrol car and adjusted his dark jacket against the damp wind. The sight of him made several customers turn their heads with the quiet curiosity people feel when trouble enters a room and belongs to someone else. Alicia watched him approach without moving from the counter. She had been in enough government buildings, enough military offices, Enough formal rooms where power wore polished shoes to recognize the difference between caution and judgment. Caution asks questions. Judgment arrives with the answer already written. Reynolds pushed through the doors, bringing in the smell of wet pavement and cold air. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with close-cut brown hair and the expression of a man already tired of whatever explanation waited for him. Claire met him halfway across the lobby, lowering her voice, but the marble carried sound strangely. Alicia caught pieces of it. Large transfer. Unusual behavior. Possible fraud. Identification concerns. She almost laughed at that last part, not because it was funny, but because her driver license, passport card, and military family identification were all inside the folder Claire had not bothered to open properly. Emily stood frozen behind the teller window, her eyes moving from Alicia to the locked terminal and back again. On the screen, the green confirmation had disappeared behind a security hold. The bank around them looked flawless, almost sterile. Frosted glass offices, brushed steel fixtures, a wall of framed community awards, a bowl of wrapped peppermints beside the deposit slips. Everything designed to say trust lived here. Yet Alicia could feel how quickly trust had limits when it wore her face. Officer Reynolds approached with Claire at his side. "Ma'am," he said, not unkindly at first, but with a flatness that made politeness feel procedural. "Step away from the counter." Alicia kept her hands visible on the marble. "I am waiting for the manager to verify my authorization." Reynolds glanced at Claire. Claire gave the smallest shake of her head, a silent permission slip for suspicion. "We are going to need to ask you a few questions." "You can ask them here," Alicia said. "I have a medical payment that must be processed before noon." Reynolds looked down at the folder. "And this payment is for who?" "Harold Bennett, a retired Army mechanic. St. Agnes Medical Center has the invoice." "That is convenient." The words were soft, but they carried. Alicia felt Emily flinch before she saw it. A man in a gray suit near the waiting area lifted his phone halfway, then pretended to check a message. Claire folded her arms. "Miss Grant, we see many cases where people are coached to use emotional stories." Alicia turned toward her fully. "Then you should be even more careful to verify facts before making accusations." For a moment, the only sound was the ceiling vent breathing cold air across the lobby. Reynolds reached for the leather folder. Alicia did not pull away. "You may review my identification and the hospital invoice," she said, "but the authorization card must be verified through the number printed on the back." Reynolds opened the folder with the impatience of someone searching for proof of his own instincts. The old photograph slid slightly from the pocket. Harold and Marcus Grant smiled up from another decade, younger, dust-covered, alive inside a memory Alicia had protected for years. Reynolds barely looked at it. Claire leaned in and saw the top sheet with the transfer amount. Her mouth tightened again. $240,000, she said, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "From a restricted family trust." Alicia's eyes narrowed. "Lower your voice." Reynolds looked up. "Why?" "Something to hide." That was when the room changed from uncomfortable to cruel. Not because anyone shouted. Not because anyone touched her. Because Alicia saw the decision settle across their faces. They were no longer trying to find out whether she belonged. They were trying to prove she did not. The clock above Claire's office clicked to 11:52 a.m. 38 minutes until Harold's window could close. Alicia looked past Reynolds toward Emily, whose hand hovered near the phone. "Emily," Alicia said gently, reading the name tag pinned above her heart, "please call the number." Emily's lips parted. Claire snapped her eyes toward her. "Do not touch that phone." Reynolds closed the folder. "Miss Grant, until we confirm what is going on, you are not directing bank staff." Alicia held his gaze. "That card is how you confirm it." He slipped it into Claire's waiting hand instead. "We will decide what matters." Alicia felt her father's handwriting in the folder like a pulse. "Help the people who carried you." She breathed in, slow and steady, and understood that the bank had become exactly the kind of room her father had warned her about, one where rules were spoken like law, but used like a locked door. Alicia knew the exact moment obedience became danger. It was not when Claire called the police. It was not when Officer Reynolds closed her folder without reading the hospital invoice. It was when the people with the power to check the truth decided truth could wait. She looked at the clock again. 11:53 a.m. The second hand moved with a tiny mechanical snap, each sound slicing another piece from Harold Bennett's chants. Alicia shifted her attention from Reynolds to Emily, because Emily was the only person in the room still looking at the screen instead of the story Claire had built around her. "There is an emergency liaison number on the back of that card," Alicia said, calm enough that her voice traveled cleanly through the lobby. "It connects directly to the authorization office. Ask for verification code Delta 79. Claire's face hardened. "Miss Grant, you are not in a position to give instructions." Alicia did not blink. "I am the authorized signer on that account. Your system already confirmed it before you locked the terminal." Emily's cheeks flushed. Claire turned slowly toward her. "Emily." The young teller swallowed, trapped between the truth and the person who signed her paychecks. "The first check came back green," she whispered. It was barely audible, but the marble caught it and carried it. A small ripple moved through the customers. The businessman lowered his phone. The elderly woman with the deposit envelope looked up sharply. Reynolds's expression changed, not into doubt, but into annoyance. He stepped closer to the counter. "Green does not mean cleared." Alicia nodded once. "That is why you call." She looked down at the old leather folder in his hand. Inside that folder is a hospital invoice from St. Agnes Medical Center, a signed authorization from the Grant Family Service Trust, my identification, and a letter from General Marcus Grant confirming emergency access for veteran care. Claire gave a short breath through her nose. General Marcus Grant? The way she said the name made it sound like Alicia had borrowed something too large for her mouth. Alicia heard it. So did Emily. So did Reynolds. He tilted his head, studying Alicia now with a faint, unpleasant smile. "Your father is a general?" Alicia's eyes remained steady. "Yes. A 4-star general, I suppose?" A few people shifted awkwardly. Claire did not stop him. Alicia felt the insult trying to enter the room dressed as humor. She refused to receive it. "Retired," she said. "But yes." Reynolds gave the folder a light tap against his palm. "And yet here you are alone in a bank lobby, dressed like you just came from running errands, moving almost $250,000. Alicia's voice lowered. "That is what daughters do when fathers are in the air and old friends are running out of time." For the first time, something in the room softened. Not enough, but enough for Emily's eyes to fill with courage. She reached for the phone. Claire snapped. "Emily, I said do not touch it." Emily froze, hand suspended above the receiver. Alicia turned toward Claire and her calmness sharpened. "You are delaying an emergency medical transfer because you do not believe I could be who my documents say I am." Claire's lips parted, then closed. Reynolds raised a hand. "That is enough." "No," Alicia said. The word was not loud. Did not need to be. Enough is when you follow the procedure you keep hiding behind. The air seemed to tighten. The lobby, so polished and expensive a few minutes earlier, now felt like a sealed glass box. Alicia could hear a pin rolling somewhere behind the teller station. She could hear rainwater dripping from someone's umbrella onto the entry mat. She could hear her own heartbeat steady, trained by years of sitting beside her father through rooms where powerful men tried to make patients feel like permission. Reynolds stepped around the side of the counter and held out his hand. "Give me your bag." Alicia did not move. "You may inspect documents relevant to the transaction. You do not have consent to search my personal belongings without cause." "Cause?" Reynolds repeated, his voice cooling. "You are standing in a bank with questionable documents and a story that keeps getting bigger." Alicia met his eyes. "The documents are only questionable because you refused to verify them." Emily whispered. "Officer, the phone number would take less than a minute." Reynolds looked at her so sharply that she lowered her gaze. Claire's fingers tightened around the blue card. Alicia saw it then, the card bending slightly under pressure, and for the first time that morning, anger moved through her. Not wild anger. Not reckless anger. The quiet kind that stands up straight. "Do not damage that card," she said. Claire looked down, startled by her own hand, then placed it on the counter. Alicia took one slow step toward it. Reynolds moved at the same time. "Stop." Alicia stopped immediately. "I am reaching for my property." You are reaching after being told not to. The customers went silent again. Emily's mouth trembled. The clock clicked to 11:54 a.m. Alicia looked at the card, then at Emily, then at the phone. Call the number, she said one more time. Reynolds's jaw tightened. Turn around, Miss Grant. A hush fell so heavy it seemed to press against the windows. Alicia did not turn at first. She looked at the photograph peeking from the folder, at Harold Bennett's young face beside her father's, at two men smiling before age and war and sickness could claim their share. Then she placed both hands on the marble counter where everyone could see them. I will comply, she said softly. But understand this. You are not stopping fraud. You are stopping help. Reynolds reached for his cuffs. Claire looked away. Emily finally picked up the phone. The sound of the handcuffs closing was small, almost delicate, but it changed the room more than a siren could have. Alicia felt the cool metal settle around her wrists as Officer Reynolds guided her hands behind her back with practiced firmness, not rough enough to make a scene, but public enough to make a point. Every eye in Whitmore Federal Bank seemed to find her at once. The businessman by the rope no longer pretended to look at his phone. The elderly woman held her deposit envelope so tightly the paper bent in the middle. A father pulled his teenage son a step closer to him, not because Alicia had done anything frightening, but because people often mistake humiliation for danger when someone else is wearing it. Claire Whitmore stood beside the counter with Alicia's blue authorization card lying inches from her hand, her face pale beneath the perfect makeup, her mouth pressed into a thin professional line. Emily Brooks had the phone receiver lifted now, but Claire's stare pinned her in place. Put it down, Claire said quietly. Emily did not. She held it against her chest like a fragile piece of evidence. Alicia turned her head just enough to see the clock. 11:55 a.m. 35 minutes before Harold Bennett's preparation window closed. A nurse at St. Agnes was probably checking the payment portal again. Harold's niece was probably sitting in a vinyl chair, twisting tissues in her lap, telling herself the money would arrive because Alicia Grant had promised it would. Promises mattered in the Grant family. They were not decorations. They were debts of honor carried across years, across wars, across hospital rooms and kitchen tables and folded flags. Reynolds reached for the leather folder still resting on the counter. We are going to sort this out at the station, he said. Alicia's voice stayed even. You can sort it out here by making one call. He ignored her. As he lifted the folder, the brass clasp slipped open. Papers slid across the marble in a soft white fan. The hospital invoice. The trust authorization. A copy of Alicia's identification. Then the old photograph fluttered down and landed face up near Claire's shoes. A smaller velvet box followed it, loosened from the folder pocket, and opened when it touched the floor. Inside lay a bronze service medallion, dulled by time but carefully kept, its ribbon folded with military precision. The room seemed to breathe in and hold it. Alicia's eyes moved to the medallion, and for the first time her expression changed. Not fear. Not shame. Pain, quiet and deep. The kind that arrives when strangers mishandle something sacred. That medallion had belonged to Harold Bennett. He had given it to Marcus Grant after a long night overseas when both men came home changed and only one would talk about it. Marcus had placed it in the family trust folder years later with a note Alicia still remembered. This belongs to the man who stood when others could not. Reynolds glanced down at the open box, unimpressed. Do not reach for anything, he said. Alicia did not move. That is not evidence, she said softly. That is a veteran's honor. The words landed in the lobby with more weight than anger. Emily's eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. A man in line removed his cap without seeming to think about it. Claire looked down at the medallion, and something like uncertainty passed across her face, but pride arrived faster. Officer, we should continue to follow protocol, she said. Alicia turned toward her. Protocol would have protected everyone in this room if you had followed it when I asked. Reynolds gathered the papers too quickly, shoving them back into the folder without order. Miss Grant, you are not helping yourself. I am not trying to help myself, Alicia replied. I am trying to help Harold Bennett. The bank fell. Silent again, but this silence was different. It had edges now. People were beginning to understand that the woman in cuffs had not come here to take something. She had come to give something before time ran out. Emily slowly raised the receiver to her ear. Claire saw it and stepped toward her. Emily. The young teller flinched, but her fingers moved over the keypad anyway. One number. Then another. Then another. Reynolds turned sharply. End that call. Emily's lips trembled. The customer requested verification. The suspect requested interference, Reynolds said. Alicia closed her eyes for half a second. Not because the word hurt her most, but because Harold did not have time for people to dress cruelty in official language. When she opened them, she looked directly at Reynolds. You can call me whatever makes this easier for you, she said. But when this is over, you will still have to remember what you chose not to check. The phone began to ring. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound traveled through the lobby like a countdown. Claire's face tightened. Reynolds stood motionless, caught between stopping Emily and pretending the call did not matter. Alicia looked at the clock. 11:56 a.m. The minute hand seemed heavier now. On the 4th ring, someone answered. Emily's voice came out small but clear. This is Whitmore Federal Bank. I need to verify an emergency authorization code. She listened, then looked at Alicia. Delta 79. The lobby froze. The air conditioning hummed above them. The medallion still lay open on the floor, catching a thin bar of light from the window. Alicia stood in cuffs, shoulders straight, breathing slow, while far away in Washington, District of Columbia, the truth began moving toward the room faster than anyone inside it was ready to face. For a few seconds after Emily spoke the code, nothing happened. The phone pressed to her ear, the receiver cord hanging in a pale spiral, her eyes fixed on the counter as if the answer might rise out of the marble. Alicia stood beside Officer Reynolds with her hands restrained behind her, feeling the metal cool against her skin and the weight of the room resting on her shoulders. The lobby had gone so quiet that she could hear the rain beginning again outside, soft taps against the tall front windows. She could hear the faint buzz of the fluorescent light above the teller station. She could hear Claire Whitmore breathing through her nose, tight and uneven, trying to keep control of a situation that had slipped beyond the reach of her title. The medallion still lay open on the floor where it had fallen, one edge of the ribbon touching the reflection of a flag beyond the glass. Alicia looked at it and thought of Harold Bennett's hands. Big hands. Scarred hands. Hands that once fixed engines in sandstorms and later shook when he tried to pour coffee on her father's back porch. He never complained. Not when his knees failed. Not when paperwork delayed his benefits. Not when the world thanked him in ceremonies but left his niece to argue with hospital billing departments. Alicia had promised him that morning, voice steady over a crackling phone line. I will take care of it. Now that promise was trapped inside a bank lobby behind suspicion, pride, and a phone call that seemed to take forever. Emily listened. Her face changed first. The fear did not vanish, but it shifted, like a curtain moving when a locked window opens. Yes, sir, she whispered. Then she straightened. Yes, Colonel. She is here. Claire's head snapped toward her. Reynolds narrowed his eyes. Alicia did not move. The title moved through the room quietly, but everyone heard it. Colonel. Emily swallowed and looked at the speaker button on the phone base. Her hand hovered there. The voice on the other end said something Alicia could not hear. Emily's fingers trembled, then pressed the button. A brief crackle filled the lobby. Then a man's voice came through, clear, older, controlled, with a kind of calm that did not ask for permission. This is Colonel James Holloway, Department of Defense Emergency Liaison Office. Identify the officer currently detaining Alicia Grant. No one answered at first. Officer Reynolds glanced toward Claire, and for the first time since entering the bank, he looked less certain of the floor beneath him. Claire's lips parted, but no words came. Emily lifted her chin a fraction. Officer Mark Reynolds, sir. The line went silent for half a beat. Officer Reynolds, Colonel Holloway said. Remove the restraints from Miss Grant immediately. Reynolds stiffened. Sir, we are investigating a possible fraudulent transaction. No, Holloway replied. The single word cut through the lobby without volume. You are delaying a verified emergency medical transfer from the Grant Family Service Trust to St. Agnes Medical Center. The authorization code is valid. The signer is valid. The documentation is valid. Your delay has been logged. The businessman by the rope lowered his phone completely. The elderly woman whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Claire looked at the blue card as if it had become hot under the lights. Alicia kept her eyes on the medallion. She would not let them see relief before Harold was safe. Colonel Holloway continued, each word precise. Alicia Grant is the daughter and authorized emergency representative of General Marcus Grant, United States Army, retired. The funds you are blocking are designated for Master Sergeant Harold Bennett's cardiac procedure scheduled today. Process the transfer now. The clock read 11:58 a.m. 2 minutes had passed since Emily dialed. 2 minutes that felt like a lifetime. Reynolds did not reach for the cuffs. His pride seemed to trap his hands at his sides. Alicia turned her head slightly, enough to see him without softening the truth. "Officer," she said quietly, "you were told what to do." The words were not revenge. They were a mirror. Reynolds's face flushed. Claire finally moved, stepping toward the terminal. Emily unlocked the transaction. Emily did not wait for Claire's full permission. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, fast now, certain now. Alicia watched the screen glow against the young teller's face. Verification accepted. Emergency transfer pending. Across the lobby no one spoke. Even the printer had stopped. Outside, the flag snapped once in the wet wind. Reynolds reached for the cuff key, his movements careful, smaller than before. The metal opened with a soft click. Alicia brought her hands forward slowly. Red marks circled her. Wrists not severe, but visible enough to make Claire look away. Alicia bent down, picked up Harold's medallion, and closed the velvet box with both hands. Only then did she look toward the phone. "Colonel Holloway," she said, her voice steady, "please confirm when St. Agnes receives the funds." The colonel's tone softened by the smallest measure. "Stay on the line, Miss Grant. We are not finished here." Emily Brooks processed the transfer with both hands shaking above the keyboard, but she did not stop. The screen asked for one final approval, and this time Claire Whitmore did not step in front of her. Claire stood a few feet away, motionless, the polished badge on her blazer catching the bank lights while her face carried the pale look of someone watching a locked door open from the wrong side. Officer Reynolds had removed the cuffs, but the marks remained around Alicia's wrists, faint red circles beneath the sleeves of her cream sweater. Alicia did not rub them. She did not hide them. She held Harold Bennett's medallion box against her chest with the same care a person gives to something living. The speakerphone crackled again. Colonel Holloway's voice returned, no louder than before, yet somehow filling every corner of the lobby. "Whitmore Federal Bank, confirm transaction status." Emily looked at the monitor. "Emergency transfer has been approved, sir. Funds are moving to St. Agnes Medical Center now. Read the receiving confirmation." Emily leaned closer, her voice growing steadier with each word. "Receiving account verified. St. Agnes Medical Center. Cardiac Surgical Services. Patient Harold Bennett. Amount $240,000. Status released." Alicia closed her eyes for one breath. Not relief yet. Relief would come when Harold was in the operating room, when his niece stopped crying, when her father stopped blaming himself for being unreachable in the air. But something in her shoulders loosened. The promise had made it through. Reynolds looked toward the glass doors, then at the cameras mounted above the teller stations. He seemed suddenly aware that the entire room had been watching, recording, remembering. "This was a misunderstanding," he said. The words were small and they came too late. Alicia opened her eyes. "No," she said softly. "A misunderstanding is when people lack information. You had information. You refused to check it." The silence that followed had no anger in it, which made it heavier. Claire swallowed. "Miss Grant, I want to apologize for any inconvenience." Alicia turned toward her. The bank lights reflected in Claire's eyes, bright and cold. "Inconvenience is a delayed coffee order," Alicia said. "You stopped an emergency transfer. You questioned my documents. You let an officer restrain me in front of strangers while my father's friend waited for a surgery payment." Claire's face folded for a second, not into tears, but into the beginning of understanding. Colonel Holloway spoke again. "Miss Whitmore, preserve all security footage from 11:30 a.m. onward. Do not delete, edit, overwrite or restrict access to any camera angle covering the lobby, teller station, entrance or manager's office? Claire's lips parted. Sir, I would need to contact our legal department. You should, Holloway replied. They will explain why compliance is in your best interest. A murmur moved through the customers, not loud, not celebratory but human. The elderly woman stepped forward and picked up one of the papers that had slid near her shoes. She held it out to Alicia with both hands. I am sorry, honey, she whispered. Alicia accepted it gently. Thank you. That small kindness entered the room differently than the apology Claire had offered. It had no defense inside it. Emily printed the confirmation page and slid it through the teller opening. Miss Grant, she said, voice low, the hospital has received the release notice. Alicia took the page. The paper was warm from the printer, and the black letters looked plain for something that had caused so much pain. She read the status twice. Released. The word blurred for a second and she blinked it clear. Then the front doors opened. Cold air swept across the marble, carrying the smell of rain and exhaust from the street. A tall older man stepped inside wearing a dark overcoat over a charcoal suit. His hair was silver, his posture straight, his face calm in a way that made the lobby seem to stand at attention before anyone recognized him. Alicia looked up, and for the first time that morning, her composure broke just enough to reveal the daughter beneath it. Dad, she said. General Marcus Grant stopped when he saw her wrists. His eyes moved from the marks to Reynolds, then to Claire, then to the medallion box in Alicia's hand. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Who decided my daughter looked less believable than a phone call they refused to make? No one answered. The rain tapped softly against the windows behind him. Alicia stepped toward her father, not hiding the confirmation page, not hiding her wrists, not hiding the hurt. Marcus Grant reached for her hands with the gentleness of a man who had held command rooms steady, but still feared the pain of his child. He looked at the red marks once more, then said quietly, a uniform is not power. It is a promise. Reynolds lowered his eyes. Claire looked down at the floor. And for the first time since Alicia had entered the bank, the people who had judged her had nothing left to stand behind. General Marcus Grant did not move like a man entering a fight. He moved like a man entering a truth that everyone else had delayed. His overcoat carried small beads of rain on the shoulders, and his shoes left faint dark marks across the marble as he walked to the center of the lobby. Alicia stood beside him with the confirmation page in one hand and Harold Bennett's medallion box in the other. Her wrist still carried the quiet evidence of what had happened, but her voice was calm when she spoke. The transfer went through. Marcus looked at her, and the hardness in his face softened for only a second. Then Harold gets his chance. Alicia nodded. That mattered more than the apology, more than the stares, more than the sudden fear in Claire Whitmore's eyes. A man 8 miles away would not lose his place in line because a room full of people had mistaken prejudice for procedure. Officer Reynolds cleared his throat. General Grant, I apologize if this was handled poorly. Marcus turned toward him slowly. If. The single word stopped Reynolds cold. Marcus did not step closer. He did not need distance to become smaller. You placed restraints on my daughter after she gave you identification, an authorization card, a hospital invoice, and a direct verification path. You had the tools to prevent this. You chose not to use them. Reynolds looked down. I believed there was a risk. Alicia answered before her father could. You believed I was the risk. The room held still. Reynolds opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, he seemed to understand that defending himself would only make the truth clearer. Claire stepped forward, her tablet now lowered at her side. Miss Grant, General Grant, this branch failed you today. I failed you. Her voice shook just enough to reveal the person underneath the title. I should have verified the card. I should have listened to Emily. I should not have allowed my assumptions to become action. Emily looked up from behind the teller window, startled by hearing her name spoken as something other than a warning. Alicia watched Claire for a long moment. Forgiveness was not a performance to her. It was not a way to make other people comfortable before they had understood the harm. An apology is a beginning, Alicia said. Not a repair. Claire nodded, tears shining but not falling. What would repair look like? Marcus looked at Alicia, letting the answer belong to her. Alicia placed the confirmation page on the counter, smoothing one corner with her fingertips. First, you preserve every second of footage and provide it to the proper investigators. Second, Officer Reynolds files a complete report that includes the documents he refused to verify. Third, this bank retrains every employee in this branch on bias, emergency authorization procedures, and customer dignity. She looked toward Emily. And fourth, the person who tried to follow procedure should not be punished for it. Emily's face tightened with emotion. Claire nodded quickly. She will not be. Reynolds swallowed. Miss Grant, he said, and this time her name sounded different in his mouth, less like a label, more like a person. I am sorry. I saw what I expected to see, not what was in front of me. Alicia held his gaze. Then remember that feeling the next time someone stands in front of you with documents, urgency, and a face you have been taught to doubt. The words did not humiliate him. They gave him work to do. Marcus looked at Reynolds with a grief older than anger. A badge should make a frightened person safer, not make an innocent person smaller. No one spoke. Outside, a siren passed somewhere far away, fading into the rain. Colonel Holloway's voice returned through the speakerphone. General Grant, St. Agnes has confirmed the patient is being prepared for surgery. The hospital administrator has received the transfer notice. Alicia closed her eyes again, and this time relief reached her fully. It came quietly, not like victory, but like air returning to a room. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. You kept the promise, he said. Alicia looked down at the medallion box. Harold kept his first. Claire stepped behind the counter and picked up Alicia's blue card with both hands. Careful now, respectful now. She slid it back across the marble. Alicia took it, but did not put it away immediately. She wanted them to see it, the small piece of plastic they had treated as impossible because it belonged to her. Then she tucked it into the folder beside the photograph of two young soldiers smiling in the dust. Before leaving, Alicia turned to Emily. Thank you for making the call. Emily wiped her cheek quickly. I should have done it sooner. Alicia's expression softened. But you did it. That was the only grace she offered, and it was enough to make Emily stand a little straighter. Marcus opened the folder, placed Harold's medallion back inside, and closed the worn brass clasp with care. The sound was soft, final, almost like a door shutting on the worst part of the morning. Then father and daughter walked toward the exit together, not triumphant, not loud, but steady. Behind them, Claire Whitmore stood in the center of her perfect bank and looked at the marble floor as if seeing, for the first time, how cold it had always been. The rain had nearly stopped by the time Alicia and her father reached St. Agnes Medical Center. The hospital stood 8 miles from the bank, its brick walls darkened by the weather, its glass doors opening and closing with the steady rhythm of urgency. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic, warm coffee, and damp coats. Alicia still carried the old leather folder against her side, and though the marks on her wrists had faded slightly, she could feel them whenever her sleeves brushed her skin. They were not wounds, not in the way doctors measured pain, but they were reminders. Her father noticed every time she adjusted her hands. He said nothing. That was Marcus Grant's way. He let silence hold what anger would only bruise. Near the surgical waiting area, Harold Bennett's niece stood from a row of blue vinyl chairs the moment she saw them. Her eyes were tired, red at the edges, but when Alicia lifted the confirmation page, the woman covered her mouth with both hands. They took him back, she whispered. The payment cleared. They took him back 5 minutes ago. Alicia nodded once, and the breath she had been holding all morning finally left her. Marcus stepped closer to the window that looked into the prep hallway. Through the glass, Harold lay beneath a white blanket, thinner than the man in the old photograph, his face lined by years the country had not seen. A nurse adjusted something near his bed. Harold turned his head slowly, saw Marcus, and raised 2 fingers from the blanket in a weak salute. Marcus did not salute back at first. He placed one hand against the glass, palm flat, and for a moment he was not a general, not a man whose name could move calls through Washington, District of Columbia, but simply an old friend who had almost arrived too late. Alicia opened the folder and took out the velvet box. She held it to the glass so Harold could see the medallion inside. His tired eyes softened. The heart monitor beside him kept a calm, even rhythm, each beep small and steady, like time choosing mercy. Marcus looked at Alicia. "You did not let them make you hard," he said quietly. Alicia watched Harold close his eyes as the nurse spoke gently to him. "I wanted to be," she admitted. "For a minute." Her father nodded. "That minute comes for everyone." She looked down at her wrists. "Then I remembered what you wrote. Help the people who carried you." Marcus's eyes shone, but his voice stayed firm. "And you carried him today." Down the hall, a television mounted in the corner showed muted local news. A clip from the bank played briefly, blurred through the reflection on the hospital glass. Alicia turned away from it. She did not need the world to replay her humiliation to prove it had happened. Justice had already begun in quieter ways. A preserved video file. A formal report. A teller who would never again confuse fear with obedience. A manager who had looked at the cold floor and finally seen herself in it. An officer who would have to write down in plain words what he chose not to verify. Hours later, when the surgery doors opened and the doctor stepped into the waiting room, everyone stood at once. The doctor removed his cap and smiled with the exhausted kindness of someone bringing good news. "He made it through," he said. Harold's niece began to cry. Marcus lowered his head. Alicia closed her hand around the blue card in her pocket, not as a symbol of power, but as proof that power meant nothing unless it arrived in time to protect someone. That evening, Alicia stood outside the hospital beneath a flag moving softly in the wet breeze. Her father came beside her and draped his coat over her shoulders without a word. Across the parking lot, rainwater reflected red taillights in white hospital windows. The city kept moving, unaware of how close one man had come to being delayed by another person's doubt. Alicia looked at the fading marks on her wrists, then at the lit windows above, where Harold Bennett was alive, breathing and resting. She did not smile loudly. She did not celebrate. She simply stood there in the hush after justice, feeling the weight of the morning loosen into something warmer than victory. Kindness had not made her weak. Patience had not made her powerless. And dignity, even when tested in public, had carried the truth farther than anger ever could. Beside her, Marcus Grant took her hand gently, careful of the tender skin. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. Above them, the flag lifted once in the wind, then settled into the quiet.